I think some of the key lessons are, well, first of all, that what can actually be achieved. So there's a degree of optimism. The R2P is, as you say, only 10 years old, and there's already been significant agreement around this doctrine. There was intervention in Libya, there's been numerous resolutions, so it's actually had quite a remarkable development in that sense. So there's one sense to be optimistic. On the other hand, it's to be realistic and actually not to over-egg what can be achieved. So some of the R2P critics always say that it hasn't done everything that it set out to do. Well, I think the R2P advocates are actually quite clear that it will never do everything that it can. It's quite limited in what it can do, but it will try and make some degree of difference. The main way that it's new, and the way that it's new focused in a lot of the literature, is the notion that there's some sort of moral duty to react when states are manifestly failing to protect their populations. So previously there was spoken about in terms of the right to intervene, it was morally optional whether you do so. The R2P gives the idea that it's actually morally required to do so. Now, the 2005 World Summit Agreement and the international law doesn't say that there's a clear legal duty, but underlying the R2P, I think it's clear that there is this moral duty to react. So that's one sense that it's new. I think, in addition, there's just a new language of the R2P, and I think the language of the R2P is actually very important. So although states already have responsibilities to look after their citizens under human rights law, the language of the R2P is actually very potent in actually gathering political will around protection responsibilities of states under Pillar 1, that is to protect their own citizens from mass atrocity crimes. So although it's not strictly new, that language is new, and that language has political importance. And one more thing is, sometimes we get hung up on the newness, but why do we care about whether it's new or not? What matters is whether it actually makes a difference. I think there are several. So one of the ones, looking actually, something I'm doing, I think at the moment, is about there's a lack of clear appreciation of what the alternatives are to military intervention under R2P when you need that Pillar 3 response. So when you need a timely and decisive response, the states are manifestly failing to protect their populations, what should be done instead? Now, there's been a whole host of work on military intervention, but much less on, say, the other mechanisms such as naming and shaming, economic sanctions, so on and so forth. And particularly much less on those from an ethical perspective, so whether those are right or the moral problems involved when you actually engage in those sorts of, or moral case for and against, with those sorts of options. So that's one project I'm looking at the moment. But there are lots of other gaps as well. So to name one, I think that there needs to be much more work done on the relationship that peacekeeping has with the R2P. So peacekeeping missions are one of the key ways of actually fulfilling the R2P, not under Pillar 3, but potentially under Pillar 2, so international assistance. But this peacekeeping missions have been hugely expanded recently, much more coercive, and the links between those and the R2P haven't been sufficiently explored, I don't think. So I think you can divide the views about the rising powers into two camps. So there's the skeptics and the optimists. So the skeptics think that the rising powers and the non-interventionist positions that you highlight are going to be the death knell of R2P. It's going to lead back to sovereignty as responsibility, sovereignty as authority. States aren't going to be willing to engage in military intervention, and so on and so forth. But on the other hand, there's the optimist, and I'm probably more of an optimist, that says that states, as the rising powers gain in influence, they'll need to be seen as acting legitimately, because this is one of the key ways that they're going to be able to maintain and develop their global position. And as they do so, they're going to need to engage with norms such as the R2P, propagate them and develop them, and be what are called norm entrepreneurs. And I think we've already seen this to some extent with Brazil's notion of responsibility while protecting, where they actually, Brazil proposed the notion of responsibility while protecting in the context of the aftermath of Libya to try and advance the R2P debate. And I think actually ultimately it was a helpful contribution and actually helped to advance the R2P by giving some clarifications about military intervention under Pillar 3. So if we look at Brazil's example of the contribution in terms of RWP, responsibility while protecting, I think there's perhaps reason to be cautiously optimistic about the roles that the rising powers will play in terms of the future of R2P.